reality.
We had an avalanche of lying from President Trump.
How did a Canadian reporter become fact-checker-in-chief to the American commander-in-chief?
It sort of took on a life of its own because of, frankly, how much lying he does.
Trump is again sowing doubt based on no evidence that the election won't be free and fair.
This level of voter suppression we have not seen. This is a new threat to American democracy.
The Canadian government has been bracing for November 3rd and the uncertainty that could follow.
If he thinks confusion and chaos can help him hang on, I think there's every prospect he'll engage in.
Hello, I'm Donna Friesen. Welcome to Washington, D.C. We're here because the U.S. is on the cusp of making a pivotal decision in its political history. Plenty of journalists have covered President Trump over the last 4 years, but only one has consistently, relentlessly fact-checked him. And he's Canadian. His name is Daniel Dale. When he spots a lie, he calls it a lie. That might sound simple, but hardly anyone in this town does it. Dale started calling out politicians when he was a Toronto City Hall reporter back in the Rob Ford era. Now he's at CNN. He told me being Canadian gives him more freedom to do what he does. And what he does isn't easy.
Let's talk about some facts. Here's our fact checker, Daniel Dale, the hardest working man in the news business.
He is straightforward.
It's almost too stupid to fact check.
Unassuming.
I'm just enjoying listening to your conversation.
And fearless.
We had an avalanche of lying from President Trump.
For 5 years, Canadian journalist Daniel Dale has listened to or read transcripts of almost every public event where President Trump has spoken.
I never aspired to be a fact checker. I never aspired to be on TV. I thought I would be a Canadian print reporter my entire career. I was at the Toronto Star and I thought I'd stay there for years or decades. And I started fact checking Trump, and it sort of took on a life of its own because of, frankly, how much lying he does.
We're always protecting people with pre-existing conditions.
Chris, he's in court, as you know, right now, trying to kill those protections in Obamacare with no replacement plan.
I brought back 700,000 jobs. They brought back nothing. They gave up on manufacturing.
So everything about that claim, Wolf, is inaccurate.
As we get closer to election dates, whether it is this election or the 2018 midterms, in addition to the ad-libbed impromptu lies that he is known for, there start to be more lies written into his speeches.
What do you think is behind that?
I think Trump and his campaign know that they can get inaccurate, false information to millions of people unfiltered because the outlets that these people are consuming are not fact-checking him.
Dale's live tirades of truth after a litany of lies often leave his CNN colleagues speechless. This one went on for more than 3 minutes.
Trump said, I have done more for the African-American community than any president since Abraham Lincoln. That is ludicrous. He said he'll, quote, continue to lower drug prices. They've increased during his presidency. He said Democrats want to defund the police. Biden, again, doesn't, has rejected that. And he said that Biden's plan would eliminate America's borders. No, just no. It's wrong.
Oh, that's it?
There's more.
Yeah, I mean, wow.
How much time do you got, Anderson?
It's a full-time job. Dale has built a searchable database to keep track of it all. At last count, he says he's documented more than 9,000 false claims.
It's sorted by claim and by category and by date and by type of event. And so when Trump says something for the 30th or 50th or 100th time, I can tell you, that was the 78th time Trump made that claim.
How did a Canadian reporter become fact-checker-in-chief to the American commander-in-chief?
Whoa, come on.
It all started with Rob Ford, the erratic, crack-smoking, now deceased former mayor of Toronto.
Are you going to apologize?
Dale, then a City Hall reporter with the Toronto Star, was investigating a real estate deal Ford was involved in.
And the mayor came out and confronted me. Chased me with a raised fist. It was very strange. Anyway, he then went on television and essentially accused me of being a pedophile.
Dale sued him. Ford eventually retracted his words.
I wish to sincerely apologize again to Mr. Dale if my actual words have caused him any harm or personal offense.
Dale wrote this column about it. Rob Ford is lying about me and it's vile. It was the first time he called a politician a liar in print.
And so I gradually started using the word lie for other false things that Ford was saying. And then, when I moved to DC in 2015, started covering Trump. And then when Trump started lying, it was kind of a no-brainer for me at that point. I used the word lie covering Ford. Why can't I use it covering Trump?
He says he's got plenty of haters, but he has lots of fans, too.
Daniel Dale is, for my purposes, the most important reporter really in the world right now.
Eric Alterman is a journalist, professor, and the author of 11 books, including Lying in State, Why Presidents Lie, and Why Trump is Worse. Why do you think that other media outlets do not cover President Trump that way, do not call out his lies the way Daniel Dale does?
He didn't grow up in this media culture that is so deferential to the president that they're afraid to call a lie a lie.
Do you think being a Canadian, and Daniel, makes a difference in how you're approaching this?
I think it does. I think being Canadian and working for a Canadian outlet at first at the Toronto Star gave me a level of freedom that many American reporters at American outlets did not have. I'm not worried, but by using this kind of language, by being straightforward, I'm jeopardizing my future in the American media.
We're rounding the turn on the pandemic.
Dale says as Election Day approaches, the more Trump amps up the false claims.
Biden was imperfect. There were at least a few false, misleading, or lacking in context claims from him. But for a fact checker, you're kind of sitting there with Biden. Occasionally, you're like, oh, that's wrong. With Trump, you're like that I Love Lucy episode in the Chocolate Factory. You don't know which one to pick up because there's just so much. And so, again, with this president, we just see a constant barrage incessantly of false or misleading stuff.
Does it ever just make your head explode?
I'm fine. People express serious concern about my mental health. Honestly, I'll get emails, certainly tweets being like, are you okay? Or you want to contribute to your vacation fund?
He does have plans to take a beach vacation after November 3rd. And what if Trump wins? Do you think you can keep this up for another 4 years?
I don't know. It is hard for me to envision doing this for 4 more years.
Though the rest of the world can't cast a ballot, it does feel like there's a lot at stake for all of us in this presidential election. Donald Trump has upended not just the American political establishment, he has disrupted relationships with America's allies. And now, well, we're all still caught up in a pandemic. The future of the United States seems uncertain. Why does he refuse to commit to a peaceful transition of power should he lose? And why so mistrust in the most basic functions of a democratic society? It was undisguised ambition that descended that golden escalator at Trump Tower in 2015. People thought it was a sideshow or a PR stunt. It wasn't.
The American dream is dead. Politicians are all talk, no action. They will not bring us, believe me, to the promised land.
From the beginning, Donald Trump has portrayed himself as the only man who can save America.
I'm so smart. I am the most brilliant human being that has ever lived.
His style, his message have been consistent from the start. I spoke with Sarah Kendzior, one of the few journalists who back in 2015 predicted Trump would win.
Trump did not emerge in a vacuum. Our institutions were badly battered by the time he came into office, but what he then did was exacerbate all the worst tendencies of American life, American politics.
Kendzior is an anthropologist who studies authoritarian regimes. Her latest book is called Hiding in Plain Sight, and in it she says Trump ran his campaign like an autocrat in waiting and has governed like one ever since.
We do not have a government. We have a transnational crime syndicate masquerading as a government. It doesn't even pretend at this point to serve the American people, to do things for the public good. It's just about his self-enrichment and protecting himself and his cronies from criminal prosecution.
He has scapegoated immigrants and minorities.
These aren't people. These are animals.
Threatened journalists.
Our media is the enemy of the people.
Vowed to repeal rights and protections.
We have to have a temporary ban on Muslims coming into this country. I'm sorry.
Incited violence.
Knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously.
And he's insulted his closest allies, calling Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau very dishonest and weak. And he's openly admired dictators.
He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love.
All are authoritarian tactics. And President Trump used those tactics to take over the Republican Party and has taken the U.S. and the world on a wild ride, a ride that might not be over.
Now everything is partisan, and so if the Republicans are controlling the Senate, Republicans are controlling the Supreme Court, then there really isn't a possible way to oversee a president who's breaking norms of democracy, breaking rules of democracy, and sometimes breaking the laws.
I think mail-in voting is going to rig the election. I really do.
As he did in 2016, Trump is again sowing doubt based on no evidence that the election won't be free and fair, when the real, more insidious problem is voter suppression, laws and policies that make it hard for certain people to cast a ballot. Dexter Voisin is the Dean of the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto and author of America the Beautiful and Violent.
Many of these suppression tactics, removal of poll boxes, limiting polling sites, purging individuals from the rolls, all things that disproportionately impact black and brown individuals and poor whites in America. This level of voter suppression we have not seen, particularly coming from the White House. This is a new territory and a new threat to American democracy.
It can sound alarmist, far-fetched, impossible in the land of the free and the home of the brave. But the theory of American exceptionalism, the belief the U.S. follows a different path than other nations, is being tested.
I can't think of anything else he's talking about more than sowing doubt about the election result that's to come. He's undermining the election. He's making it so that millions of his supporters, if he loses, will not believe the result. And that's incredibly dangerous.
And democracy is fragile.
Democracy is hard to retain, and most of the world lives under authoritarian regimes. We should be under no illusion that America is somehow wildly different from the rest of the world. And we have to be vigilant and just not be naive. And if people are vigilant and not naive, America has the institutions and the population to resist an authoritarian takeover.
Trump has millions of fervent supporters who want 4 more years, but millions of other Americans are scared right now.
We all are afraid. We're afraid of the pandemic, we're afraid of authoritarianism, and we're afraid of mass violence. And all 3 of those are very real and ongoing threats.
Instead of condemning white supremacists, Trump seemed to send them a signal.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
He said if he loses, it's because his opponents cheated, and he refuses to say if he'll concede.
Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
He's a man of his word as far as his promises go. When he says he will stay in office, believe it. He'll try to stay in office. Authoritarians always tell you what they're going to do, and it's a great mistake not to take them at their word.
None of us, of course, have a crystal ball, but Sarah, if you can look ahead to November 3rd, what do you see?
There's really no limits as to what can happen. I hope that none of this happens. I hope I'm wrong about everything and that, we manage to move forward in a peaceful way. But just, I don't think it's realistic to expect that, given everything that's happened in the last 4 years. And given the fact that Trump encourages violence, and steadily has encouraged violence. And if he feels like he's a martyr, if he feels like he has, been targeted and he's lost, he will encourage his most violent followers to rise up and attack people.
It seems so unlikely in the land of liberty. It could be there's a landslide that leaves no doubt on election night, or a close result, and a loser who rejects the outcome. This is 2020, and it feels like anything is possible.
Coming up on The New Reality.
In the corridors of power across Ottawa, planning for this election started early. So how will Canada respond if the result is unclear?
Canada has no bigger trading partner or ally in defense and security than the United States. And what American voters decide in the U.S. election will impact Canadians. It's standard procedure for our federal government to plan for every potential outcome of a U.S. vote. This time, that planning has more variables and more wild cards than usual. Mercedes Stevenson reports on the extraordinary preparations and how Canada's response will unfold.
Unconventional, wildly unpredictable. Donald Trump has shattered our expectations of normal. And as the 2020 campaign draws to an end, the president appears willing to defy the most basic of democratic norms.
Can you give a direct answer? You will accept the election?
I have to see. Look, I have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes.
For months, Trump has claimed the only way he can lose is if there's fraud. John Bolton, Trump's own former national security advisor, warns the president won't leave graciously if defeated.
If he thinks confusion and chaos can help him hang on, can help affect recounts and contests, I think there's every prospect he'll engage in it.
Sources tell Global News the Canadian government has been bracing for November 3rd and the uncertainty that could follow. In the corridors of power across Ottawa, planning for this election started early. It has been intense, with a surge of briefings and intelligence reports preparing for all scenarios. Canada's embassy in Washington will be at the heart of the government's response. Ambassador Kirsten Hillman has been in near daily communication with the Prime Minister's office, multiplying her contacts in the White House, Congress, the State Department, and security agencies like the FBI and CIA. So how will Canada respond if the result is unclear? Roland Paris served as Prime Minister Trudeau's first foreign policy and defense advisor. He says if there's any doubt about who won the election, the Prime Minister would be wise to keep his powder dry.
Canadian Prime Ministers rarely have anything to gain by involving themselves in U.S. domestic politics, and they often have quite a bit to lose.
Aside from reaffirming its confidence in the U.S. electoral process, Canada will do everything it can to avoid being drawn into the political firestorm raging south of the border. Multiple sources told Global News that Canada can't ignore the threat of civil unrest and violence in the United States. One senior national security source said the government is quietly assessing the risk it could spill over into Canada. For 10 years, Ward Elcock served as Canada's top spy, leading the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS.
There may well be some people who do weird things in the aftermath of the election, particularly if, as seems likely at this point, Mr. Trump loses and loses badly. There may be some of his supporters who do get pushed into violent scenarios that are hard for us to imagine.
Earlier this month, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security called white supremacists the most persistent and lethal threat to the country. And that threat is on Canada's radar too, according to Thomas Junot, professor of international affairs at the University of Ottawa and a former analyst with the Department of National Defense.
One scenario that is always a nightmare scenario for Canada is the issue of security threats coming from Canada, crossing the Canadian-American border and reaching the U.S. The fear on our side is always that the response on the American side will be to close the border, which economically would be devastating for us.
Speaking on the condition of anonymity, a former senior Canadian intelligence official said agencies in Canada will closely monitor potential flashpoints. States like Michigan, where the FBI recently foiled a militia plot earlier this month to kidnap the state's governor, and Washington, where waves of protests may have attracted more far-right extremists. Canadian and American intelligence and defense operations are so deeply intertwined, any disruption to that relationship could be devastating. So what if Trump were to issue wild orders in the post-election chaos, like demanding U.S. agencies cease all intelligence sharing with allies? Several intelligence sources said the U.S. defense and security apparatus likely won't take those orders if it considers them illegitimate. Trump may be disruptive, but the U.S. military and intelligence community is still run by professionals, and they won't toe the president's line if he goes rogue. And as erratic as Trump may be, few experts think he'll barricade himself in the Oval Office and try to cling to power if he loses.
Mr. Trump has been a blowhard most of his time as president. There's not much reason to believe that he's suddenly going to get courage as a result of being defeated, especially if, as seems increasingly likely, it's likely to be a fairly major defeat.
No matter what happens on November 3rd, the overwhelming consensus appears to be that Americans and their institutions will find a way to endure.
This is not our first rodeo. We've had bitterly contested elections before, and we've gotten through it, and we'll get through this one too.
Welcome back. We are only days away from the U.S. election, and the United States feels so divided. Global News will be here to guide you through election night. Join us Tuesday night for America Votes 2020. Our coverage starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Global TV app, Amazon Prime Video, and on our website, globalnews.ca, and on YouTube. Coverage will continue here on Global Television at 11 p.m. local time, 10 o'clock in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. The new reality will be back from Washington, D.C. next week. I'm Donna Friesen. For now, good night.